welcome everybody to the latest edition of Getting Hybrid Work Right. We're thrilled that you're here with us today. And before we get started, I just want to express our thoughts with everybody who has coworkers, family, friends in the Southeast, particularly Florida. At I4CP, we've got a fairly large contingent of employees in Florida in particular, but in the Southeast. And we've checked in with many of them, but it sounds like it's been a really nasty hurricane that everybody's had to endure down there. And so we hope everybody's okay. Tom is not in Florida, my usual co-host, but Tom had an internet outage in his neighborhood in New York. So he's not joining us today that I'm aware of anyway. He thought he might try to make it. So I will singly host the call today, but I've got a great guest I'll introduce here in a second. I know some of you might not be familiar with I4CP, so like we do at every webinar that we do here, we'll just give you a little bit of background on who we are. At I4CP, we're doing more HR research than just about anybody on the planet, always with a business lens of what are high-performing organizations doing differently with their people practices versus low-performing organizations. And I'll use that term in a couple of the data points that I'm going to share today, and Brenda will speak to. When we talk about high-performance organizations, we're talking about companies that have better revenue growth, market share, profitability, and customer satisfaction than their competition. And so I4CP's crack team of analysts looks at those 4 factors on everything that we research, and we look at that over a 5-year time horizon to see what are those organizations doing differently, but then through regression analysis, what practices are specifically correlating to bottom line business impact. And what we're going to be talking about today is absolutely one of those practices. We're thrilled to work with so many wonderful organizations overall, and here's just a small snapshot of some of the companies that contribute to our work, our research, and are part of our network. And so I want to thank those organizations. I was able to visit yesterday, or I'm sorry, it's 2 days ago now, with the team at ADM in Chicago. And I was part of their HR leadership team meeting. And I told them I'd wear the swag and brand ADM today for them. So shout out to my friends at ADM. Also, a shout out to the numerous great speakers that we've lined up for our conference in March. If you haven't been to this conference, it's been rated one of the best conferences for HR executives. We've been running this conference now for a couple decades, and it's called Next Practices Now because we explore next practices in human capital. And that's the term we hang our hat on while we uncover a lot of best practices. We really love outlining and highlighting next practices, which are practices where we see a strong correlation to bottom line business impact, but only a small percentage of companies have yet implemented those practices. So you can see we've got some nice speakers who are going to be joining us. This is just the start. We'll be announcing more speakers very shortly. I had a great conversation this week with Gary Hamel. He will be very thought-provoking for sure, and talking about his latest book. But all of these speakers have some great next practices to share going forward. If you haven't figured it out by now, I'm Kevin Oakes. I'm the CEO of the company. And I just want to outline a couple of the upcoming calls that we've got. On the 6th of October, we've got a call with Lisa Ashworth from Pepsi. This is part of our talent acquisition next practices call. I'm looking forward to visiting again with Kate Guibo. Kate is at United Airlines. She's the head of HR there. And we're going to talk to her on this call about enhancing the employee experience. And then we've got longtime friend Julie Lodge-Jarrett, who's the CPO at Dick's Sporting Goods, the following weeks, talking about strategic HR next practices. So tune in to those calls, and then we've got many more that are already scheduled. Zeta's doing a fantastic job keeping the schedule full. So thank you, Zeta, for all your hard work there. Also, thanks to our research team for their hard work in this particular study. We've got a new study out in the field that's very apropos to what we're going to be talking about today. It's what's next for corporate culture, and we're looking at a variety of things around culture. How did it change during the pandemic? Some traits of toxic cultures versus traits of healthy cultures. We're looking a little bit at micro and subcultures as part of this research. So if you haven't taken this survey, please do so. You can find it out on our website at that URL at the bottom of the screen here. It's going to close next week, but we've already got thousands of people who have participated in the study. We'd love to hear your voice, and you get first access to the results for taking part in it. All right, we're going to kick it off with a survey that is very pertinent to that topic I was just discussing. And how has your organization's culture changed since the onset of the pandemic? This is a question we've been asking numerous audiences that we have throughout the last month. So Zeta, if we could launch this poll and have everybody answer this real quickly. Thank you for those already doing so. This is a topic we've been tracking almost since the start of the pandemic, but just really looking at companies that are being a little bit more proactive versus reactive or passive around their culture in this new era of work. And I think every organization, certainly numerous ones that I met with in the Midwest this week, are trying to figure out what should we be doing about our culture now that we have more of a remote and flexible or hybrid workforce. So let me just end the poll. Okay, I may have stopped sharing. So no, I guess I didn't. So the majority of you said it's improved somewhat. But almost an equal percentage said it had deteriorated somewhat. So that's interesting, and appreciate those results. It's a little different than what we've been seeing from the results in this poll. Luckily, nobody said it's become much worse. So glad to see that. All right, so let me stop sharing those results, and we'll just move on to what you all came to really hear, and that's insight and info from our marvelous guest, Brenda Sugrue. Brenda, welcome. You're on mute, Brenda. There we go.
Hi, Kevin, and hi, everybody. It's really great to be here today with you all, talking about this very timely and important topic.
Well, Brenda, I'm thrilled to have you here. You and I have known each other for a long, long time. I was trying to think back. It's got to be a couple decades, probably. Brenda is, as you can see from the screen, is the CLO at EY, the global CLO. But she has another title. She's been working with us at I4CP as the member co-chair of our Chief Learning and Talent Officer board. Brenda's been a member of that board for several years, and we recently instituted member co-chairs. So she's the first one for that board and has been doing a marvelous job working with our chair, John Koné, the other co-chair, I should say. And I thought it would be great, Brenda, for you and I, as we talked about earlier, to just talk about the importance of learning as we talk about culture. And so I think to kick it off here, let's make sure everybody's familiar with your background and what you're doing at EY. So can you give us just a little bit of insight into your career as well as what you're doing today?
Yes, Kevin, and it's maybe longer than I'd like to admit, this career I've had. And I'm originally from Ireland, if you can't tell from my accent, but I'm based in San Francisco now, and I've been in the US for probably about 30 years now. And I've had two careers in the field of education. First, I was an academic. I was a professor of instructional design and technology at the University of Iowa for many years. And then I went into the corporate world, and I've had many roles in different companies. And then finally, I got my dream job at EY. I like to call it my dream job. And I've been there now for about 9 years. And one of the reasons I went to EY is because it has a fantastic culture, and learning definitely plays a key role in maintaining that. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. Throughout my career, I've been active in professional groups like I4CP so that I can gain access to the great research and peer networks such as the CLTO board, where we share best and next practices. I've been, as Kevin said, I've been a member of that board for 8 years now. And this year I took on the extra role of representing the voice of the members as a member co-chair. So today I'm going to wear 2 hats, one as the leader of learning at EY and also representing some of the trends I'm seeing across the broader group of organizations in the CLTO board.
Brenda, I think when you and I first met, it was probably through ATD, then called ASTD, where you were for a little while, and I was involved with the board there. And I came into the office today to find my latest copy of TD Magazine on my desk. And on the very front cover is a nice story about McCormick and Company, but the headline of the story is "Culture Thrives When Employees Savor the Company's Development Opportunities." So there's a little shout out to our folks at ATD. But this is clearly a very hot topic these days. And I think a lot of companies are really looking at how they can become more of a learning culture going forward. And I know you're a fan of the book that we published last year, Culture Renovation, which is a book about how do you change organizational culture. It's got 18 action steps in order to do so. But a common theme throughout the book is the importance of learning and how certain companies, Microsoft is, maybe one of the more visible ones, have really used learning to their advantage. And in the beginning of the book, we talk a lot about the very successful culture renovation that Satya Nadella engineered at Microsoft. And Satya has been quoted many times about his passion for learning, saying he wants a culture of learn-it-alls, not a culture of know-it-alls, which I just really resonated with me because there's a lot of organizations that I've interacted with that absolutely do have a lot of know-it-alls inside the organization. And it's kind of human nature. People use knowledge as power. They use it to protect themselves. They use it to protect their fiefdoms. And they're not necessarily incented to share that knowledge, and they're not necessarily incented to learn overall. But I think, Brenda, with all the organizations that you and I have interacted with over the years, it's very clear when you have that learning culture, you can predict it's not only going to be a healthy culture, but a financially viable and growing organization overall. And I think this becomes more important in today's day and age with so much change that's happening, and it's not slowing down. It's only going to increase. I think a lot of CEOs are interested in how they can have a culture that really not only accepts change, but views it as an opportunity. And this is one of my favorite charts that our research team has produced that shows high performing organizations, again, those companies that have better revenue growth, profitability, market share, they view change much more positively than low performing organizations who typically view it as wearing us down, as overwhelming, or even a threat to going forward. And there are certainly some companies I walk into where I talk to employees and they say, boy, I just wish things would stop changing all the time. I just wish it would slow down, and it's just not going to happen. And learning is so critical to creating that agile culture. If you have a culture that is constantly seeking out new information and sharing that information, you're naturally going to be a much more agile organization, and you're going to have a learning culture. So we, a little while ago, did a study on this and looked at how many organizations feel that they do have a learning culture inside the organization, again, delineating between high and low performers. And what struck me most about this, not necessarily just how high performers outpace the lower performers, we see that in almost every study we do, but just how few companies overall said, yeah, we have a learning culture to a very high extent, or even to a high extent. I'm just curious, Brenda, does that strike you as a little concerning as well?
Yes, and I guess I feel I've been very lucky at EY where we do have a very strong culture of learning, and I think it's a top priority for all organizations to have that for 2 big reasons, actually. One is everyone nowadays, ourselves included, have to be learning new skills all the time to stay relevant for our current jobs and future jobs with all the change that's going on, as you said, Kevin. And then employees expect and want to work for organizations that are providing really great opportunities to build their skills and grow their careers. We know from your research in I4CP that one of the traits of a healthy corporate culture is that the organization supports that continuous learning and development of all its employees.
Yeah, for sure. And so to frame our conversation today, Brenda, you and I talked about, let's go over what are some of those traits of a learning culture overall. And I know you have thoughts around this, certainly from the EY perspective, which I consider a culture that absolutely embraces a lot of these traits. And so there are 5 total. Let me just go through these sequentially. The first one is that active knowledge sharing permeates the organization. Something I just talked about, but something I want to talk about a little bit further. The second, and I know this is one that you and I have a lot of interest in, Brenda, is that leaders at all levels are actively teaching. This is something that we're seeing happening a little bit more, so we'll talk about that in a second. That learning is actually reinforced in hiring of new employees, but then once they're on board, reinforced in the performance plans and performance process of those employees. The fourth is that managers are rewarded for the development and mobility of their employees. And that's something that we both feel is very underutilized in organizations. So we'll talk about that. And the last one is that learning's effectiveness is constantly measured. And Brenda, you and I have been in many, many conversations around how do you measure learning? And, with our friends, Jack and Patty Phillips, we've explored this quite in depth, along with many others. So that's another trait. So let me just pause there, Brendan, get your thoughts on some of these traits, particularly as it applies to EY.
Kevin, well, I think this list really captures the elements that we need to focus on to create a culture of learning. And we're going to get into more detail on some of them later. But right now, I'll just comment on number 3 and 5. At EY, learning is a key driver of attraction, retention, and engagement. We know this from data, and we know that opportunity to learn is one of the main reasons that people join EY. And I'm proud to say that we're now able to tell people that if they join us, not only will they learn from and with the best on and off the job, but they can also earn a master's degree while they're with us. And that is one of the key selling points, I think, for us in the market at the moment as we hire people. We're also very focused on the measurement.
Pause there, Brenda.
Sorry, yes?
I want to pause on that, on the master point, because that is really unique. I feel like that you're telling incoming employees that they can earn a master's degree with the organization. Tell us a little bit more about how that works and what's the uptake on that?
Well, I think I talk a lot about our badges and our badges and degree programs. We started out in 2017 with creating badges for future-focused skills, particularly in the technical areas of like data analytics, cybersecurity, etc. And once we had we knew that there was a great demand for these badges within EY, we started thinking about how we could stack them and combine them and work with a university to turn this into the basis for a tech MBA we started with. And now we have a tech MBA, Masters in Business Analytics, and a Master's in Sustainability, which are awarded by Halt International Business School, fully triple accredited, fully fledged business school. So these are bona fide master's degrees, and we offer this free to every employee at EY. They just have to get their badges, which are very rigorous, learning, on the job, assessment, all kinds of things go into the badges, but they kind of substitute for the traditional course curriculum at a university. And then on top of that, they do modules with faculty, capstone projects, more of the traditional type degree activities. But it really is, it's a fantastic thing for all our people. And across all ranks and geographies, we've already graduated, I think, 120 tech MBAs. We had our first 10 MBAN graduates recently, and it's really taken off.
From a talent attraction, but also retention perspective, It just seems to me this continues to increase, you know, the importance of development. And I think a lot of the workforce is looking for that when they're choosing who to work for or choosing, you know, whether they stay or leave an organization. And there certainly has been a lot more attention to it over time. I'm actually on the advisory board of Guild Education, and I see the demand, you know, for both higher ed programs, but as well as just the certificates and the badging that you just outlined, Brenda. Anything to continue to develop and acquire new skills seems to be what, you know, these new employees are constantly seeking going forward.
And, you know, something that validates the acquisition of the skills while they're at the company that they can take with them if they choose to go, which is fine as well. And just on measurement, we have done some studies of the impact of the badges and degrees on retention, and it can, with badges alone, it's about 2%. Of course, the people who are getting the degrees, it's up to about a 6 percentage point increase in retention for those, and also all kinds of increases in promotion, advancement to high performer status, etc. And just on the measurement, I wanted to say, I wanted to put in a plug for really focusing on measurement, because if you have a culture of learning, it's one thing to have people think it's there, but to have the data to support it when people come knocking, or just to have those discussions and to support the implicit value is really important. And I would say that I spend about 20% of my time reviewing, summarizing, communicating, and discussing data, whether it's about specific programs or just the data in general, that shows that people are really embracing and engaging with the learning.
I'm on the board of another company. It's a learning measurement company called Performative, and you and I both know Kent Barnett quite well. And he and others in that space have just done a really good job, I think, at bringing measurement to the forefront, but also trying to make it easy for the L&D department to measure the effectiveness of learning. And you've been in this long enough, Brenda. You were one of the pioneers, I feel like, in the measurement side, you know, many years ago. But do you feel like that has improved over time?
Oh yeah, I think so. I think too, a lot of the systems that we use are generating more usable data all the time on consumption, perceptions of value, and I think there's a lot more expertise out there now across the board in how to simplify and come up with some metrics and keep tracking them and get insights into learning. And of course, all of the analytics where you can now tie learning data to other talent and business data as well. I think it's becoming easier to do that.
Now, I'm sorry, I took you a little bit off stride here by my interruption earlier. Was there anything else you wanted to say about these 5 traits?
No, I think let's keep going, Kevin, and I'll comment on some of the other ones as you go.
Well, first, let's comment on a question I saw in the chat, or really it's a comment in the chat. So thanks, Sandy, for commenting. Sandy says, we are having difficulty reconciling the desire for a learning culture with employee burnout. Employees want development, but they don't want to put anything else on their plates. And I totally get that, Sandy. And I'm just wondering, Brenda, have you seen that with your workforce?
And actually, I was going to talk about that a little bit later. Absolutely. I mean, we're finding that we have fantastic learning, and most organizations now do have fantastic learning, but the barrier to that is time. There's a time famine, as Arianna Huffington would say. There is a time famine, and people do not have enough time to take advantage of that. And that's something that's a challenge for us at EY as well, and for most of us. And we're trying to find ways, and I think you have some examples later on, Kevin, on a slide, where things like dedicating some time to learning, having learning days, having learning hours in the calendar, and really making sure that managers are encouraging and giving people the time. But I would say time is the biggest barrier, absolutely. And the time famine is coming from high workloads and people really feeling that they're under pressure all the time. And we need to find ways to solve that problem in order to give them time to spend on their own well-being and learning, and, you know, the things that really end up improving or increasing productivity and performance in the long run.
Yeah, we will talk about this a little later, but it's a little bit of a double-edged sword, right? You want to give them all those development opportunities, but make sure that you're not causing more stress on the workforce by doing so. But I think, a lot of times I think we have to make sure we're separating the formal learning from the informal learning. I'm a big believer in informal learning. We've been talking about that for many, many years now. But it does seem to be something that well-run companies and companies who have a healthy culture and good financial performance, they seem to do very naturally. And it relates to this next stat, which is one of my favorite that our team has come up with. In high performance organizations, employees are nearly 4 times more likely to regularly share new knowledge with their colleagues than those at lower performing organizations. And you kind of see this when you go from organization to organization, where you have a lot of really healthy collaboration happening in the company. It tends to be a real contributor, I think, to how agile that organization is. But I think the concern today is with more remote workers and everybody not in the office necessarily, is that collaboration happening? Are we still regularly sharing that new knowledge with colleagues? And I'd be curious from your perspective, Brenda, how have you seen that pan out at EY?
Well, you're absolutely right, Kevin, that, most learning happens on the job and from your experiences and the work you do. And we want to make sure we acknowledge that and let people feel it's not just taking courses or getting badges that is the learning time or the opportunities to learn. And we have many mechanisms within EY just for straight knowledge sharing, knowledge repositories, a whole knowledge system where people put their great examples of work they've done. We've also incorporated this into our badges where the on-the-job experience where you apply your knowledge, those are also made available and shared. And we have very vibrant Yammer communities as well, where people have different communities of practice and regularly share their knowledge. So I think we have to make sure that while we count the formal hours of learning, we should be really acknowledging and having people understand that they're learning all the time. And we baked this into one of our leadership categories of leadership behaviors, which we call curiosity. So we're encouraging everybody all the time to be curious, to be constantly investigating areas that might be just personal interest that could lead to career changes in the future.
Yeah, I think the phrase that I love is when you kind of flip the switch from knowledge is power to knowledge sharing is power. And in those cultures where you're rewarding people for how much they do share knowledge with their coworkers, you can really make a huge difference in the overall culture of the organization. Now, I prefaced this next stat earlier as one that you and I both really like, but it's the whole concept of leaders as teachers and how high performing organizations seem to embrace this a little bit more than low performing organizations. But we did a study a little while ago specifically on this subject and looked at some of those benefits, such as supporting a culture of learning or aiding and aligning the learning strategy to the business strategy, aids in culture change, culture renovation. You can see some of the other ones on this screen. This was a concept that was popularized years and years ago, but what I find is that today, very few companies have formal leaders as teachers programs. I don't know exactly the percentage. I'm going to guess it's less than 15% of companies that probably have those formal programs. But Brenda, you and I were fortunate to be out at Intuit in Silicon Valley recently for the board meeting that we had for our Chief Learning and Talent Officer board. Shout out to Humera, who hosted us at Intuit. And she updated us on how they're using leaders as teachers at Intuit, which I thought was pretty cool.
Yeah, I think Kevin, this concept, there's a resurgence of it at the moment across many organizations as people are finding new ways to involve leaders in the development and the delivery of programs. Intuit, as you said, has an entire strategy of cascading common leadership principles and practices by leaders through all levels of the organization. And that was a really fantastic example. At EY, we do involve leaders all the time in everything from development of learning programs, promotion of them, and then facilitation of the programs themselves. And it's part of that knowledge sharing you talked about earlier as well.
Well, one of the things we found when you have an active Leaders as Teachers program is that leaders, first of all, you never learn a subject better than when you're forced to teach it. So that's always a good phenomena. And the companies that do well at this, they don't just leave it up to chance. They're actually working with those leaders to make them better teachers. Oftentimes, leaders can come into a classroom environment and tell stories, and they're pretty good storytellers usually, but those stories don't always relate to the context of what you're trying to teach. So it's important to make sure that you've worked this out ahead of time, you know, what leaders are teaching. But they get much more exposure to the workforce gets much more exposure to those leaders. You know, as companies found out back in the 80s when they started this process, there can be tremendous benefits to putting in this program. So I'd encourage companies to think about this. If you don't have a Leaders as Teachers program, look at some of those examples out in the marketplace and think about how you can put this in place on a formal basis, not informal basis. We have also done some work just around integration of L&D across the talent spectrum or across the human capital spectrum. And we found that there were, from the research perspective, some real benefits when you included learning in different aspects of human capital. For instance, on the recruitment side, we found that high-performing organizations were 4 times more likely to have a commitment to ongoing L&D being discussed in interviews, which I just love, in that using L&D to attract top talent, especially in job descriptions, was something that high performers did much more so than low performers. I think if you're going to have a learning culture, actually asking questions about somebody's proclivity to learn is a big part of it, because now you're bringing in people who are natural learners rather than trying to create them or make them be learners long term. And Brenda, I'd just be curious, have you seen this occur in your career on the recruitment side?
Well, absolutely, and I think, you know, when you identify a behavior such as self-driven learning or learn it all or curiosity as one of the traits that you're really looking for and developing in your employees, I think that naturally should be represented in your job descriptions and in the characteristics you're looking for when you're hiring people in, and certainly at EY we do that.
Another area that we see in high performing organizations is including L&D in performance expectations. So in the performance review process, really discussing your ability to learn and how much you've learned, as well as what I talked about earlier, sharing knowledge and discussing that as part of that performance management process is something we see high performers do more so than those low performers. The same is true in total rewards. So we see rewards and recognitions programs include learning related rewards more so in high performers, and compensation being linked to the application of skills inside the organization or knowledge inside the organization. And we've spent a lot of time lately talking about skills. We'll talk about that in a second, and how important that's become in organizations. The last one, and this is by no means an exhaustive list, but if you look at succession, career paths specifying those knowledge and skills required for advancement or advancement linked to the application of those skills is something that high performers do twice as much as low performers overall. So one thing I love talking about, Brenda, and I know you're passionate about, that is a very easy process to put in place, I think, and maybe I shouldn't call it so easy, because I know some companies struggle with, but it's an inexpensive process, is the ability to move talent inside the organization and have that as part of the development process. We've done a lot of work on talent mobility. It's very clear that high performing organizations are much more likely to have formal talent mobility programs. In fact, it's almost an indicator for us of who is a high performer and who's not if you have a formal talent mobility program. From a culture perspective, we found that companies that were very effective at changing culture, they were doing this at a much greater level than companies that were not effective at it. And we've explored just what are some of the obstacles that inhibit companies' ability to move talent. And almost every single time we look at this, it's this top one, that managers are not encouraging movement as the biggest obstacle. How have you seen this play out inside EY or other places you've been, Brenda?
Well, I think one way to get around this, Kevin, is to not necessarily bypass the managers, but to democratize learning and empower people to just build whatever skills they want. And then to have a way to make those skills visible to everyone in the organization so that it literally becomes a free marketplace for talent within the organization. And there is a culture that you don't have to ask permission of your manager to pursue your skills and other opportunities. And certainly at EY, that is encouraged across the board. And we use the badges in those future focused skills. And also there are multiple places inside EY. There's not just one marketplace where everybody can go and look for short and long-term opportunities beyond their current role. And indeed, the first use case we have for a proper skills database is the AI-driven matching of those skills to client engagement, which is a big part of the way EY puts people to work. You might be in a home team, but you're always being sought after and put on different client engagements, and then you have different engagement leaders all the time. So engagement leaders love this because they have access to bigger pools of talent to actually staff their engagements.
Yeah, and I guess your business naturally kind of sways towards talent mobility versus some other organizations. But as I talk to organizations who don't have this in place, they are often citing the fact that managers kind of game the system a little bit. They're trying to keep their top talent in place, and maybe we'll do some token moves. And what I'm encouraging them to do is really make this a part of that manager's performance review, but also highlight those managers that are moving talent. I love when the former talent hoarders kind of move towards this and suddenly become talent magnets. Everybody wants to go work for that guy or that gal that gets them developed, promoted, moving inside the organization. And if you look at the third obstacle here, lack of positions to move employees into, oftentimes I find that results from thinking about this only as a move up. In many organizations, they use lateral movement to keep things fresh, to keep developing those employees. But there's also a lot of benefits to the organization. Collaboration, communication improves. You tend to break down silos when you get people moving across the organization. So I just love this topic. So much so I wrote an article about this last year in HBR, and then this year we did a webinar on it because they were getting a lot of demand for the article. But if you want to explore this a little bit more in depth, you can check out that article, or I'd be happy to forward it to you, or maybe Zeta can post a link to it in the chat. But Brenda, you just mentioned something that is also a pretty hot topic that these days. And it's the concept of an internal talent marketplace, being able to find that talent internally. And this is a topic that we also love to talk about because the fact is, for a lot of employees, if they're looking to move their position, it's a hell of a lot easier to go outside the organization than to find a new role inside the organization. I have many friends who have told me, I'm kind of dead man walking because I told my manager I'm looking for a new role inside the organization, and that's, frowned upon inside the company when it should be embraced in a healthy organization. But I think for a lot of employees, it's easier to go outside because you lose this little cloud over your head of a salary band that you're in the organization, or anything from a title perspective, or just really from a reputation perspective of the department that you are in as you're looking around the organization. And so I think companies need to be cognizant of that, and how can we alleviate that inside, so we incent people to look for new roles internally, and incent managers to hire internally. I think for a lot of managers, it's just a hell of a lot easier to go outside than to be perceived as poaching talent internally, which is the case in a lot of companies, in my opinion. There's just really a small percentage of organizations that are currently leveraging a healthy internal talent marketplace to access some of the needed skills or capabilities. And it's the skills and capabilities that I think make this all work. We've been doing a lot of work around skills databases. Tom Stone, in particular, in our organization, has written quite a bit about how to do this, and we just published a playbook on how to create a skills database inside the company. But it's bugged me for quite some time that when we hire somebody, we hire them because of all the skills they bring to the workforce, but then we pigeonhole them into the job we just hired them into and ignore skills that maybe aren't quite pertinent to the job we hired them into. And the easiest example is, do they speak another language? Do they know Mandarin Chinese, for example? Maybe it's not pertinent to the job we have them in right now, but it could be very useful down the road. I also love this one data point that 27% say LinkedIn knows more about our workforce than we do as an organization. Brenda, I know you have a lot of thoughts in this area around skills of the workforce. Love to hear your thoughts on it.
I think, the setting up of an infrastructure to manage your skills and to have the skills then be used to drive identification of talent, matching of talent, retention of talent is absolutely a priority for all of the organizations, certainly in the CLT board. We've been having many discussions, and almost every discussion we have seems to end up talking about skills and how we can use skills as the driver of all of, as the solution in a way to pull all of this together. It's almost like we're not talking about learning anymore, or learning culture, or learning as the end game. It is skills. Skills is the end game, and is also, I guess, what you get when you have a vibrant learning culture. But you also have to have a way of monitoring, measuring, managing those skills, and having the skills be the currency, as we like to call it now, the currency of mobility, the currency of finding opportunities, and definitely inside the organization first. I think the Great Resignation and challenges with retention have forced a lot of organizations, or encouraged a lot of organizations, to up their game on providing visibility and ways for people to stay within the organization and achieve their own personal career goals, as well as helping the company. So, I mean, this is a big passion of mine at the moment. And I think Tom Stone's guidebook is a really great place for people to start. And I think it's free on the I4CP website.
I think it is to members, for sure.
Okay.
I was in Minneapolis yesterday, Brenda, with a group of talent professionals, and we got into a pretty good discussion around this. And they asked some really good questions. I'd love to hear your thoughts on these. Just around, if you're going to start populating a skills database, is it self-reported? Do you allow individuals to populate their own skills? Do you import them from LinkedIn? Which and sometimes those skills are a little shady. So I'd just be curious how you've seen this done effectively, Brenda.
Right. Well, I think it's got to be multi-source. And the best systems right now that are doing this are pulling data in from multiple sources, whether it's even learning records of what learning or badges people might have, their job descriptions or their existing profiles, evaluations of their performance in certain roles. I mean, there's just a slew of data that can be brought to bear to populate an initial estimate of your proficiency, if you like, or where you lie on that novice to expert scale on whether it's leadership skills or technical skills. Then the next step usually is for the employee themselves to take a look at the profile that's been generated by the AI or by the system and validate that themselves. And then the third step, and the one that I think is going to bring assessment really to the fore again in learning and in talent, is having some kind of ways of validly doing some assessments of those skills that would be a final validation of the levels of skill, because you want these to be valid, otherwise it's not going to work. Yeah, so sure. I think that is a big challenge at the moment, getting those skill estimates right.
Especially in your environment, Brenda, or any of the large consulting organizations where you've got that engagement lead and they're looking to populate a team based on the right skills and capabilities of the project that you're tackling. Having a validated skills database that you can turn to and find the right team members, doesn't matter location, doesn't matter where they're in the hierarchy. Let's focus on the skills that they bring to the table. That's really what's important.
And actually, that's what we're doing. Like I said, the first use case for the skills database and skills assessment is that talent marketplace, which for us is for engagements. So we're all like everybody else. We're experimenting at the moment. We're taking some leaps of faith, and then we're learning as we go. But this is really, I think, at the heart of all learning and talent research and innovation at the moment.
Well, like I said, there's only a small percentage of companies that have skills databases in place today, but there's certainly a significant percentage who are trying to get there, trying to create the skills databases. So I think that playbook could help. But similar to the talent marketplace, there's a small percentage of companies that have that put together. We for the members who are on the line, we have some case studies, great case studies out there of companies who have put both of these together. So be sure to check those out, and feel free to reach out to us if you can't find those case studies. One of the organizations I mentioned that we work with is Microsoft, and we did a study with Microsoft last fall, really around how do you build a learning culture overall at your organization. We went out to a number of well-known companies and looked at some of the practices or initiatives that they felt were most important in creating a culture of learning. And I thought it would be interesting for you and I to just kind of walk through a few of these, Brenda, and also get any comments or questions from the folks on the line. And if you do have a question, feel free to share it in chat. But curating content on key topics of interest, that has certainly picked up a lot in the last few years, and the ability to curate on individuals' preferences, I think has been a real boon to learning overall. I'm sure you've seen that, right, Brenda?
Yeah, I think for a while there was almost too much content, and learners were getting overwhelmed and confused and needed some guidance. So I think the focus now on curating content, not necessarily building, but curating content on topics. And again, at EY, I'm a bit of a broken record here, but for our badge programs, we do very careful curation of just the right content for that badge. And then it's easy for a learner to say, well, if I want to learn more about a certain aspect of cybersecurity or sustainability, I go to that topic or that badge, and it's right there for me. I don't have to do the searching by myself. So I think this makes it easier for learners to find what they need. Definitely.
Yeah, and I've loved seeing some of the innovation that's happened over the last few years from a technical perspective. There's some great platforms that I think are making the curation a lot easier for the workforce. There's also technical platforms that are making the accessibility a lot easier. Even though we've been talking about this since believe it or not, the late 80s when Gloria Gary was talking about EPSS. Having content available at the moment of need is really one of the big, I think, brass rings that people are reaching for. Trying to create an easy to use system where I can access that content right when I need it. Oftentimes we talk about this in terms of sales situations, but there are many other situations where we've seen companies provide this and provide a platform where individuals can find that content right when they need it. And you and I have been talking about this for years, Brenda. Do you think this is improving as we move forward?
Well, I think it is. And I think, the current term that people are using is learning in the flow of work. And this has been, again, a dream for decades, actually, to make the right learning available just at the right time and just at the right size of our type of content. But I think the fact that we now have broken our content up into smaller chunks and we're able to map it to tasks and to more granular topics, it's making it easier for people. And there are systems, like you say, that are bringing the search capability closer and the AI-driven recommendation closer to where a person might need that piece of content or that knowledge.
My longtime friend Bob Mosier would be very happy that we're talking about this, because this has been his lifelong passion to make it easy to find content at the moment of need. This third one on development days I really like too. As we were talking about the burnout factor earlier, I think this can be a real benefit to organizations to overcome the burnout factor when you segment days for learning inside the organization. I'm working with one Fortune 500 company that's implementing this right now, and the CEO is behind it and said, I want to have some specific days that we focus on development and team building. And you're a fan of this approach, right, Brenda?
Oh yeah, and all learning leaders that I know are implementing this somehow, finding creative ways to give people that time, or to make that time visible and acknowledge it. I was talking to somebody, one of our members, the other day, and they were talking about Fuel Up Fridays, they call it, and they dedicate certain times on Fridays. I have at EY, I see people with their team saying, now we are all, for example, we are all going to get a badge in agility. Let's take the topic, and they dedicate time and they set themselves a goal, and they do it again. It's peer learning too. They do it together, but they set aside time to maybe even have debriefs and discussions, which are not prescribed or managed by the learning organization, but it takes on a life of its own. We've seen everything from learning weeks, learning days, where there are programs of learning, where there are maybe courses or topics that you want everybody to engage with, but they haven't had time. So you put those on the agenda, and you might even have facilitated sessions in between personal sessions. This is a great way, actually, to promote and give people the time to learn. I'm sure people on the call here would have other examples. Maybe if you put them in the chat, we can have a look at them.
Well, I think that enterprise-wide top-down approach to development really can signal to the workforce how important this is, and as we said earlier, try to get rid of some of that burnout factor that we fear. Some of these other pieces of advice I thought were good as well. So leadership development for all managers and leaders, not just your high potentials. And also, your frontline managers. Sometimes we don't do enough leadership development for those earlier managers or lower level managers. That's something that companies like Microsoft for sure have put a lot of effort into. Aligning the vision via a learning council, or otherwise getting varied learning leaders together. That's something else I've seen work very well inside of organizations. sometimes when learning is decentralized, this can be critical to making sure that you've got unified purchasing decisions, that you've got a unified approach towards instructional design, just making sure that all learning leaders inside the organization are on the same page. Is that something that you do at EY right now, given the size of the organization?
Absolutely, we've been doing all of this for many years now, and I think the first thing, even if you can't centralize, you can standardize, and you can get people involved in and making agreements about what will be some standard processes, some standard quality standards and checklists and processes, and that's the first step. I mean, learning councils. We have learning councils. I guess in two ways. We have steering committees, which are business led for each of the lines of business, where we figure out what are the needs, what are the consumption of the current learning, etc. But when we think about learning councils, we have different networks of layers of leaders in learning that come together as teams, regardless of where they report into or where they sit. There is a continuous improvement network. I have a learning leader network where we share information, we make decisions together, and we meet as much as we can. Ideally in person. You can't be getting people together in person. If you want to unite teams and get agreement on things, then I think, you know, meeting is essential. But it's you know, basic, I think, change management, or just good management, and to involve the right people in the decisions along the way. I'm seeing some great questions come in the chat here, but I think we're running out of time, Kevin.
Yeah, we always do. But yeah, we are nearing the end here. But I do want to mention this last one. I like the network of internal learning ambassadors. That's not something I see happen in a lot of organizations. I think it's a great concept. We wrote about that in Culture Renovation. Having culture ambassadors throughout the organization, sort of at the ground level. I think it's the same concept. You know, the more you can get people at the ground level who are on board with what you're trying to do from a learning perspective, the easier it's going to be to roll out the right programs. Well, we are just about out of time, Brenda. I do want to, you know, make sure I take the time to thank you for joining us. And just lending, you know, some of your experience and your expertise to this discussion, just as you're doing at that Chief Learning and Talent Officer board. And so if there are any CLOs or heads of talent on the line and you're interested in learning more about that board, reach out to Brenda, reach out to me or John Kone, the other co-chair. We'd be happy to tell you a little bit more about that board. I also just want to put in a quick plug. We've got a master business course that's starting on October 6th around culture renovation. So you can learn more about that out at culturerenovation.com. This is a 7 or 8 week course that's being taught by my co-founder, Jay Jamrog, as well as myself. And we had a very successful one a few months ago, and so we're running this again due to popularity. So feel free to check out that master business course. And reach out to me. We've got Tom's email here as well, my usual co-host. So Tom, hope you do get internet access back. And we'll see you on the next call, I'm sure. Brenda, thank you very much. It's just always a pleasure to talk to you and see you, and just enjoyed working with you for so many years.
Same here, Kevin. Same here. And thanks everyone for joining today. And feel free to reach out to me too if you can find me somehow. I guess you could get my email is brenda.sugru@ey.com.
Very good. Hope everybody has a great rest of the week. And if those of you in the Southeast, please be safe, take care, and hope you've weathered this hurricane okay. Talk to everybody in a couple weeks.